Okay, so let's begin, shall we? When you connect to a wireless network, you want to make sure that it is secure. And what I mean by that is that you use a password to access it. Now, there are a few different protocols that are in place for wireless security, for wireless networks. The first big one was WEP, which stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy. That was soon superseded by WPA and WPA2, which stands for Wi-Fi Protected Access. This is what you mostly see now, WPA or WPA2. There was also a protocol called WPS, which was Wi-Fi Protected Setup. This was dependent on the router that was providing the wireless network. The router is the device that sends out the wireless signal. However, one thing you need to know about WPS is that it was discovered a little bit after it had been implemented in a number of routers that it had a pretty significant vulnerability, security vulnerability. So as a result, it's not much in use now. If your router has WPS, then what you should do is disable it. That varies, how to do that varies depending on what router you have. So the best thing you can do is just perform an online search at a search engine, something like the name of your router plus disable WPS. So here's where the term eavesdropper comes into place. An eavesdropper, as you know, is someone who is listening in on somebody else's conversation. They're not part of the conversation. They're just listening in to another conversation. Computers are largely the same way. When you connect to a network, your computer is communicating with another computer over the network. Now, a computer could be really far away, and that's often the case. But the thing is that some people, if they know how, can eavesdrop in on a conversation. Now, this is the case with unsecure networks, right? So those that you would connect to, like at a coffee shop or another public place. Unsecure networks that you don't need to use a password to log into. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use public networks, but you just need to realize that when you're connected to them, it's possible that somebody else could be eavesdropping. So when you do connect to a public network, it's probably best if you don't use any passwords or usernames that you don't want compromised, because it is possible that somebody's eavesdropping in. Now, one thing you should be aware of is SSL, or Secure Socket Layer. SSL is a protocol that's been in place for a long time, and basically what it is it's a security measure that helps prevent other people from listening in or eavesdropping on the conversation between the two computers. It's important especially for unencrypted wireless networks, but it's also important otherwise as well. Now, whether or not SSL is being used is not dependent on your computer, right? It's dependent upon the website you're accessing. So you don't really have a choice as to whether SSL is being used. However, you can identify whether it's being used, and that will help you make a good decision about whether to proceed with the website. But one thing that you can do is make sure that your internet browser, your web browser, is always up to date. Now, a web browser is what allows you to access the World Wide Web, right? So we're talking about Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari. Those are the four major browsers. There are others. Basically, it's just what allows you to connect to the World Wide Web, the program that you use to do so. Make sure that that's up to date, because the most up-to-date browser will be able to utilize SSL in the most secure manner possible. So let's talk about how you can identify whether the website you're on is utilizing or uses the SSL protocol, right? It's actually pretty easy. When you're on a website, every website begins with the prefix http://. This stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it's basically an indication that you're on a website that is on the internet, right? It's so standard and so common that a lot of current browsers don't even display that anymore in the web web URL, in the address bar. They'll just take the HTTP : right out because it's assumed. When a website uses SSL, this beginning segment, this prefix, is changed to HTTPS : They add an S in there, S for secure, right? So this signifies that the website you are on is employing the SSL protocol, the Secure Socket Layer Protocol. This means that the connection is secure and that you're blocking out eavesdroppers. Now, in browsers that remove the HTTP : in most cases, it will always display that prefix if Secure Socket Layer is in use. So it will always show HTTPS : if SSL is being used. As I said, that's even with the browsers that normally take that prefix out. All right? That way you can always identify whether the site you're on is using SSL. Now, just because you see that HTTPS in there doesn't mean that you're 100% safe, right? But it's a good sign. It's a very good sign because it means that SSL is in use. If you're signing in on a popular site, it should be using SSL. It should show up as HTTPS. Now, there are some sites out there that are, relatively insignificant that may not have it yet. But all major sites will have it, and especially if they require secure details, including passwords to sign into an account. So it's also a very good thing to look for when you're buying something online or putting in any sort of sensitive information, right? Now, as I mentioned, the existence of SSL does not mean that you're 100% safe, because if you're buying something online, you still don't know whether the merchant is necessarily credible or reliable. But it does mean that they put a service in there that means that other people can't eavesdrop in as you're putting in your credit card details or whatever that is. Now, another thing you need to be aware of is that when you use a public computer, like at a library or at a university or at work, or you access a wireless network there, you need to assume that anything that you are doing can be seen by others. Anything you do at work, at school, it can be seen. Now, it's not necessarily being eavesdropped in by people with malicious intent, but the system administrator can, you should assume that they can see that, whatever you're doing. So just make sure that whenever you're using a public computer, that you're remembering that. Another thing is that if you are using a public computer, make sure you log out of everything after you're done. I had a friend once who we were abroad, we were out of the country, and we were at an internet cafe emailing our families back at home. And the next week when we went to the internet cafe again, to my friend's horror, he discovered that he couldn't log into his email. Now, what had happened is he had forgotten to log out the previous week, and the next person to use the computer changed his password so he could no longer log into his email. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of bad things that can happen if your email is compromised. Fortunately, it was just someone trying to pull a practical joke, so they didn't try and steal any information from him through his email. But he lost all of his contacts, he lost all of his communication with anybody he'd ever had over email. You can see how it's a problem. And if that person did have malicious intent, it could have been a nightmare to have that compromised. So just make sure you always log out of everything whenever you're using a public computer.